And it looks like we are live both on YouTube and in the Zoom. So hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, Sophomores versus Juniors versus Seniors, different years, different prep. So my name is Erika. I'm here with Magoosh, and today we're going to talk about the differences in test prep for SAT and ACT, whether you're a sophomore, a junior, a senior, and how your different years can impact your prep. Now, before we get started, can I just get quick confirmation in the chat, either in YouTube or in the Zoom? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Can you see our slideshow? Just so I know, just say hi that this is working, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much to those of you who have said hi in the chat. Hello, thanks for being here. Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and get rolling. So welcome. We still got some folks arriving, it looks like, so we're gonna get started. Okay, so first, really quickly going to introduce myself. So my name is Erika. I'm the SAT ACT Senior Curriculum Manager here at Magoosh. So what that means is I work on our lessons, our video explanations, our written explanations, our questions, how those questions are presented, how the lessons are presented, how we do our practice tests, things like our live classes, things like our admissions curriculum, all of that good stuff I am involved in. Now, I am currently working on SAT and ACT, but over the years, I've taught and written material for more than 10 different standardized tests. So standardized testing is kind of my life, but SAT and ACT is where I started. It's where I keep coming back. So it's one of my favorites. Now, I live in Seattle, Washington with my husband and my 2 cats. It has been kind of a weird weather day today. We had pretty crazy rain and wind, that's kind of interesting for us. And my windows were leaking. So that was a fun little adventure for us earlier. Looks like the sun's back out, but if I disappear, you'll know it's because I'm tending to some house problems. But I think we're in the clear. So that's me. And those are my 2 cats, if you want to see them. Okay. Now, one thing that I want to share before we go ahead and get going is that we have a coupon code today for 20% off any ACT or SAT plan here at Magoosh. So that includes our online only option for either SAT or ACT, where you get video lessons, explanations, all of that good stuff. But it also includes our live classes for either SAT or ACT, which is 4 weeks of 8 classes or 16 hours of live lessons that covers 95% of what you're going to see on the SAT and ACT. We have a class starting next week for SAT, one on weekdays, and we have one starting the following weekend for SAT as well. ACT, we have one that's starting the week after next. So 20% off, it's a really good deal for those classes. It also applies to our admissions classes taught by yours truly. There is one that starts again the week after next. We have one that covers all about admissions and one that specifically focuses on the personal statement. Really recommend those. I really like teaching them and hopefully you would enjoy them as well. So 20% off any ACT or SAT plan. That code is Magoosh webinar 9/27/21. That's today's date. We'll show this code again toward the end, but again, highly recommend taking advantage. Okay. All right, going ahead and jumping in with our goals for today. And I'm going to go ahead and close up that poll. Thank you so much to everyone who participated. All right. So our goals for today's session. So first goal, we are going to find out how to approach test prep as a senior, then how to approach test prep as a junior, and then how to approach test prep as a sophomore. So we got a little bit in here for everybody. Now, if you're going, hey, what if I or my child what if I am or my child is a freshman or younger than a freshman? Don't worry, I'm also going to talk about that. So we're going to cover all ages and how that impacts your test prep. And then we're also going to learn some test prep best practices that are going to apply to any student, regardless of when you're starting your study. So let's go ahead and jump on in with senior year. So really quickly, if you are in the Zoom, use that raise hand function if you are a senior yourself, or if your child is a senior and you are looking to prepare for either your SAT or your ACT. And if you are in YouTube, you can just comment since we don't really have that function. Okay. So it's looking like some folks in here are in their senior year. May not be our most popular group, but yes, we do have some folks in here. So let's go ahead and talk about what we're doing with senior year, because at this point, timeline is getting a little bit tight, right? So that is coming up. College applications are around the corner. So what do we do? So senior year is crunch time, right? Because if you are applying to college to go next year, applications are starting to become due, right? So if you are looking at like early admissions or early decision, you're likely looking at November deadlines, or if you're applying to a UC, you're probably looking at November deadlines. If you're looking at regular admission for most schools, that's looking like January, right? So we are probably looking at a November or early December test date. So that is coming up. All right. So this is crunch time. So what can we do to take advantage of those remaining couple of months? So the first thing that I recommend is to take a full length practice test as soon as possible. ASAP. Now, if you have taken a full length practice test recently, that's okay. This mostly applies to folks who have not taken one or have not taken one recently. I find that this can sometimes happen because students are going, I'm not totally prepared, right? I want to be ready before I take that test. But that's not the entire purpose of a practice test, right? It's not to say, I'm done. Let me see what I scored. That's part of it, to see how we're scoring. But part of it is also to get used to the experience of taking a practice test. It is study in and of itself. But there's also another function of practice tests. And that is to see what sorts of mistakes we're making in the context of a test. Now, there is stuff that we can learn from study, right? We can go, oh man, I'm not doing great with this when I'm doing my practice problems. However, the test environment is different. The mistakes that you're going to make in a testing situation with the timer, when you're exhausted, are likely going to be different than the mistakes you make in practice. Similarly, the distribution of questions in an actual test is more likely to be realistic to an actual test than the problems that you're practicing on. So a practice test is going to be a really good way to see how am I doing, one, but also where do I need to focus? Where am I making mistakes? So we're going to go ahead and look at, okay, what mistakes did I make? Right? Where did I miss problems? Where did I maybe get behind on time? Where did I flub? Right? Where are the sorts of things that I am going to be affected on test day? Then we're going to explore a little bit deeper, right? Because some folks don't go past that first step. They go, okay, I missed that problem. Great. And that's it. That's all they do. So we're going to explore that a little deeper. Why did I make that mistake? Not why do other students make the mistake, but why did I do that, right? Was it because I didn't really read the question carefully? Or was it because my scratch work was messy? Or was it because I actually don't know that formula? Or was it, et cetera, right? So we're going to explore personally, why did I make that mistake? And then we're going to go even deeper. And this is really important. How can I recognize that mistake and avoid it on other problems? So it might be something as simple as, okay, I need to, on an exponents problem, remember that the rule is when I have the same base and I'm multiplying, I need to add the exponents, not multiply, right? That would be a really simple kind of content-based one, but it can be more complicated. Like, okay, when I am faced with any sort of word problem, I need to be approaching that question stem more slowly. So rather than reading the whole thing and then processing, I want to process every time I hit a piece of punctuation. Or it might be more like, okay, I need to, when I'm in an inference question on reading, be careful of answer choices that have extreme language. All right. So these are going to be nuanced. They're going to depend on the problem, and they're going to depend on you. So if this sounds like it takes a lot of time, it does, but this is a really critical step. One, because it's a learning experience in and of itself, but two, because it's going to allow us to build a study plan that's going to target our weaknesses. Now, I see a lot of folks who are in their senior year, who are a month out, going, okay, this is a great time for me to learn everything that's on the test. However, if you don't need to learn everything that's on the test, right, because you're not making mistakes on everything that's on the test, that's not going to be a great use of your time, because it means you're going to be wasting time on stuff that isn't important to you, right? And it means that you're probably underspending time on things where you're actually making mistakes. So what we're going to do is we're going to take what we learned from that practice test and then make a study plan around it to go, okay, I do not need to work on algebra, right? That is a strength for me. I am nailing it on these. However, there are some arithmetic concepts that I'm struggling with. Okay, so now we're going to work on those. Or maybe we know, okay, geometry as a whole, I'm solid, but I need to review circles because arc length is throwing me. Great. Or maybe I am strong on reading passages when I have time, but I'm struggling with getting through it under time pressure. So, okay, I need to practice that and evaluate whether my strategies make sense for that timed environment, and so on and so forth, right? So we're going to create that personalized study plan so that we're focusing our limited time on the stuff that will impact us the most. So we're going to plan to also target our time appropriately. I think a lot of folks just go, I'm going to study as much as I can, which sounds good in theory, but I find that unless we in advance commit to that amount and commit to when it's going to happen and what it's going to be, as much as we can, ends up being like an hour and a half, right? And it just kind of fills in the cracks of when we're sitting there with nothing to do. So what we're going to do is we are going to plan in advance that we want about 10 hours per week. Now that can flex up to maybe 15. I don't recommend going above that just because you're probably going to run into diminishing returns there. And then we're going to block off that time on the calendar. Now, this is especially important when you're in senior year, again, because you have limited time frame. If you end up having kind of an off week when you're a junior or a sophomore, it's not as big of a deal because you have some time to make it up. But senior year, we want to take advantage of every week. So we're going to plan in advance when we are doing that study, what days, what times, how does that fit in with our schedule? And that makes it a priority, right? So I like to say if it's not on the calendar, it's not going to get done. And I find that that's true in my own life. If it's on the calendar, something I've committed to, it happens. If I haven't committed to it, it's deprioritized and it's less likely to happen. So put it on your calendar, 10 hours per week. And then we're also going to plan for practice tests, and we take those every 2 to 4 weeks. And the benefit of that is one, additional practice with that practice test environment, with the time, with the endurance, yada, yada, but the ability to then adjust our study plan. So maybe we've really been practicing on circles and now we are nailing it on circles. Cool. Maybe we're going to keep a little bit of circles in there just to make sure that we're rock solid, but kind of reduce the amount of time we're spending there. But maybe this time we struggled a lot more with rearranging paragraphs or moving sentences in the writing section or the English section, depending on your test. Okay, I'm going to add that to my study plan. All right, so we're going to use our mistakes to adjust our study plan again. So we're continuing to take advantage of that time based on where we're at now. So if you've got a shorter timeline, like a month, I would recommend that every 2-week time frame for your practice tests. If you're looking at maybe a couple of months, maybe every 4 weeks. All right, so that's senior year. So big takeaway, our test prep is going to be extremely targeted to us as a person. I also gave a webinar a while ago that discussed how to get the most out of your study when you have a short study timeline. I recommend checking that one out for more details on what to do when you're a week out, what to do when you're a month out, what to do when you're 2 to 3 months out, for just more detail on this topic, but high level, target to you. All right, so that's senior year. Let's talk Junior year. All right, if you are in the Zoom, raise your hand. If you are in your junior year or if your child is in their junior year. Let's see. Okay, looks like this might be a popular one. Looks like this might be where most of our attendees are. Okay, so if you are in your junior year or your child is in their junior year, this is the sweet spot. So this is kind of an ideal time to be doing your study. Now, if you are in your senior year or your sophomore year or whatever, that does not mean that you cannot still have a great study experience and a great study journey and have good results. But I tend to find that junior year is just a really good time to start that study process because it's just a really good length. It's enough time to make significant strides, but it's not so much time that you end up kind of waxing and waning in terms of how well you're studying. So junior year is the sweet spot. And part of the reason for that is that you can plan your study timeline to test before your senior year starts. Now, this is really nice for a couple of reasons. So reason number one is that if you get the score you want in your junior year, you do not have to think about it in your senior year, which is awesome because senior year is a wild ride. There is a lot of stuff you're going to be doing for things like college applications. The number of essays that you end up having to write, even if you have a really well-crafted school list, is kind of bonkers. I talk a lot about this in my All About Admissions class I talk most about it in the All About Admissions class. I talk a little bit about it in the personal statement class, but that's a really, really important topic. I recommend you join our class if you want to know more about crafting a school list to make sure that your timeline actually makes sense and you can actually do your best on those applications, because I think a lot of folks don't do that. So if we test before our senior year, we have more time for those college applications and for the stuff that happens that fall, of which there is a lot. All right, so more time for college applications. But if you end up testing toward the end of your junior year and you go, okay, it's fine, right? I've got a score now, but I would like to do better, right? This is not going to be the score that I want to get into the colleges that I want to get into. I've got a webinar on setting a score goal in our YouTube channel if you want to check that out as well. But if you've got your score goal, you know what you're looking at and you're going, this is not it. The benefit of having already tested in your junior year is that now you know what you need to achieve at the beginning of senior year, and you've got that whole summer to make that happen. So if you are testing for the first time in your senior year, you don't get that opportunity to kind of go, how far off am I? How am I doing? And you don't have all of that time without school at the same time to prep. So really recommend testing in junior year if you can. If not, you can still be successful, but junior year is the sweet spot. Now, let's talk about what that study actually looks like. Now, when you are in junior year, right, you can immediately launch in with a targeted plan, kind of like we would in senior year. And that makes sense if you maybe have already taken the SAT or the ACT, or you've taken the PSAT, or you're just pretty comfortable with standardized testing. Maybe you're already scoring relatively high when you took a practice test, right? Then it might make sense to jump in immediately with targeted prep. However, if you're going, I don't feel comfortable doing that. I want to know what's on the test. I want a baseline competence, right? You can, because you have more time, start with a comprehensive study plan. You can do something that covers everything. For an example, like a live class, like the ones we offer at Magoosh, or a book, or something along those lines. So a class, a book, whatever, but something that covers everything on the exam, because once you do that, you still have more time to then create that targeted study plan. And you have a really amazing kind of backlog of information of where you did well in that class or in that book, where you struggled a little bit more, and you can try to build that targeted study plan off of that. So you've got just a lot more information than you're going to get from a single practice test. So it's up to you how you approach that, whether you want to jump in with something more targeted or if you want to start comprehensive, but you're going to end targeted no matter what. So I recommend the last month at least of your prep, make that catered to you and your weaknesses. Now, one other thing that I want to mention about junior year, if you have the opportunity to take the PSAT or the National Merit Scholarship qualifying test, it's the same thing. It's just got two names. Why? Who knows? If you have the opportunity to take that, I really recommend taking that. It's usually in October. Recently, there have been two offerings, I think October and January, but I could be making that up. If you have the opportunity to take that, I really recommend it. One, because it's going to predict your SAT score. So if you're taking the SAT, awesome. That's like a really good practice test. Two, because it's going to be really, really good practice for taking it in a test-like environment rather than at your home. And three, because it is qualifying for the National Merit Scholarship as well as for other school scholarships. So it's a great opportunity. It's an opportunity to put yourself up for some scholarships as well as great prep for your SAT or even your ACT. So if you have the opportunity to do that in your junior year, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It's a great kickstart to your prep. All right, so that is junior year in a nutshell. Moral of the story, you can start more comprehensive and go targeted rather than starting targeted, but this is the sweet spot. All right, let's talk sophomore year. So if junior year is the sweet spot, sophomore year is typically a little too early to study, but not too early to plan. So if you're in the Zoom, raise your hand if you are a sophomore or if your child is a sophomore. All right, we got a good number of sophomores in here, which is awesome. So if you are a sophomore and you are already starting your prep, that is awesome. When I say it's too early to study, I only kind of mean that. So I'm going to talk about what I mean by too early to study, but and then we'll talk about what you can do to kind of get your study on the move. All right. So one thing that you can do your sophomore year, if you have the advantage of starting this early, is figure out which test you're going to take. I have a whole webinar on this topic of ACT versus SAT, but I'm going to kind of give you the rundown now. Check out that video that recording of that webinar if you want more information on that. But the gist is, it's wise to only take one exam, right? To avoid splitting your score difference or your score improvement between two tests. It is better to focus your energy on one and get as much score improvement there as possible. So you want to pick one and commit. So how do you pick one? Taking practice tests. I love practice tests. It is a really powerful tool in your study, but it's particularly powerful to choose which one because practice tests are predictive. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a practice test for ACT and a practice test for SAT. We're going to make sure that those are realistic practice tests, just like we would for our senior year plan, just like we would for our junior year plan. We're going to make sure they are realistic practice tests, and we're going to make sure that we're separating them by at least a week to make sure that we're performing well on both of them. If we take one and then immediately take the other, the second one's not going to go as well. So don't do that. So we're going to take them really realistically, and we're going to see how they go. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take our scores. Okay, raw scores mean nothing. And we're going to look at the percentile score. So if we have a 28 on the ACT, I forget exactly what percentile that is, but we're going to go, okay, that's like a 80 something percentile, I'm guessing. So we're going to look at the percentile there. We're going to compare that to SAT. All right. And then we're going to look at those percentiles and we're going to determine which one is stronger. So if we had an 80 something percent on ACT and a 70 something percent on SAT, we're going to commit to the ACT right there. All right. If we're still not sure, we can take another round of practice tests, but we're going to pick the strongest one and just go ahead and commit. Now, if we're in a situation where our percentile scores are about the same, we're going to just pick the one that we liked more, commit to that one, or we can do another round of practice tests because again, you're a sophomore, you have time, but the goal is to select one so that we can focus on it in the rest of our year in our junior and senior years. We can also at this point figure out our timeline. All right, so we've used that practice test to determine which test is going to be right. We could also use that practice test to figure out how long do I need to study to get the results that I want. So again, if we have a score goal, or we figured out, okay, what am I looking for to get into my goal schools? Again, more on that in our admissions class. If you want to join us for that in a couple of weeks, we'll talk more about goal scores. We go, okay, all right, here's what I did on my practice test. Here's how I scored. How does that compare against what I want to get into my schools? All right. And we're going to go, okay, maybe I need a 2 or 3 point improvement for ACT. Maybe for SAT, I need a 200-point improvement. All right. So we're going to figure out with the test that we've chosen, how much we need to improve to meet our goal score. And then we can compare that against some estimates to figure out how long we're going to need to study to get those results. So based on about 10 hours of study per week, we can use the following estimates. So if we are on ACT and we're going, I need to improve like 3 points, right? 2 or 3 points. That timeline is probably only a month or 2, right? So that's probably a situation where we can start studying in the second half of our junior year to take our test toward the end of our junior year. And then hopefully that's the last one. If not, we can retake at the beginning of our senior year. Love that. If we're in the zone of going, okay, I've got a 5 to 6 point improvement, that's going to be 3 to 4 months of concentrated study. Okay, so that's probably, maybe I want to start earlier in my junior year, maybe kind of in the fall of my junior year. All right, plan for that. If we're looking at 7 to 10 points or more, that's a 6 to 12 month timeline. So that's significantly longer. So if we are looking at something in that zone, then we're probably starting the summer before our junior year, maybe doing something intensive like a class in there. And then we're going to kind of carry that study into our junior year to build up until we take that test in our junior year. All right. So that's ACT. For SAT, we have kind of a similar setup where 70 to 150 points is 1 to 2 months, 150 to 250 points is 3 to 4 months, 250 to 350 or more points, we're looking at 6 to 12 months. So based on that, we can figure out where we're going to want to start studying. So that's going to just kind of inform, do I want to start studying maybe in that summer before my junior year, right? Do I want to dedicate that time to building up my skills? Now, taking those practice tests already is some study in and of itself. So one thing that you could potentially do if you are really antsy to do some more study in advance of your junior year is intermittently, every couple of months, take a practice test or two and review those mistakes. One thing that I will caution though, against doing too much study in your sophomore year is running out of materials. Because there are only so many practice tests and so many good practice problems out there. And I find a lot of folks who start early and kind of go hard on their study in their sophomore year end up with nothing to work with in their junior year or stuff that's much lower quality. So they end up, when the time is right to be doing intensive, high quality study, without the materials they need. So it can actually be detrimental to start your study too early. So that's something to keep in mind. So sophomore year, high level story here is this is a time to plan. This is a time to prepare, but not necessarily a time to study. All right, so that's sophomore year. Now, if you're in the Zoom, go ahead and raise your hand. Is anyone here a freshman or has a child who is a freshman or earlier than that? Okay, looks like we have some folks in here who are in their freshman year or earlier. And if you are here, awesome. That's so great that you're thinking about this right now. However, my message to you is right now is a better time to focus on other priorities. Now, this is not to say that right now you are doing nothing to prepare for college and being admitted to college. There are other things that have to do with college admissions that are important right now. So for instance, freshman year is where your GPA starts counting. All right. So rather than spending time on your practice tests, spending time studying, we want to make sure that our GPA is high. course rigor. Rather than practicing for your SAT or ACT, maybe take another higher difficulty class or something after school that just raises your difficulty, because again, that's something that will matter right now. Extracurricular activities. This is something, again, that I talk about in this admissions class that starts in a couple of weeks. Again, you can go to our plans page to figure out more about it and get 20% off. But extracurricular activities, a really important element is that you have been doing them for a long time, that you have shown commitment to them for multiple years, regularly over those multiple years. So freshman year is a really great time to make sure that you are committing to your extracurriculars so that you have a compelling extracurricular story to tell when it comes to be college application season. So love the focus, love the energy, but I would recommend redirecting it to something other than test prep. Again, if you are really, really excited about something like that, there are PSATs that are targeted for younger age groups that you can take. It won't be the national merit qualifying one, but there are other options if you really do want to take that. It's doesn't really count for anything other than preparing for those exams. So that could be a good option. It does cost money, but that is something that you could do in a freshman year or earlier. But again, I would not recommend burning your practice tests now because it is just a little early and you want to save them for later in your study. All right, so that's freshman year and earlier. I'm seeing a couple of questions that have come in the chat and in the Q&A. I'm going to get to those in just a second. But if anyone else has any questions, feel free to throw those either in the chat and the Q&A, and I'll get to those shortly. All right, so now that we've covered individual years and how to approach your study differently on those individual years, let's talk about what are some good best practices that you can do if you are a senior, a junior, or a sophomore. Probably not before, because again, probably not wise to prep them. All right, so what are some best practices for your study regardless? So number one, consistency is key. We want our study to be consistent because if we are going in fits and starts, that is not good study and it's not going to be great for building knowledge. There's plenty of research on pedagogical principles that basically support the idea that if we take breaks in our learning, it disappears, right? If you're a student, you know how it feels when you come back after summer break and you go, and it takes a while to kind of remember where you were, and some things are just lost, right? So if we are not being consistent with our study, we're wasting our own time because we lose stuff and then we have to claw it back or relearn it. So consistency is going to be key. So we want to aim for several study sessions per week. They don't have to be super long. They don't have to be a ton of them. We don't have to do it every day, but we probably want like 3 to 4 to 5. So 3 to 5 is typically a healthy zone for number of study sessions per week. And we want them to be at least 20 minutes. Likely more if we are later in our timeline. So we want to be studying multiple times per week just to keep ourselves fresh. We also want to be taking regular practice tests. So this is something that I kind of shouted out throughout. Again, not something you're probably going to want to do if you're in your sophomore year, or depending on your timeline, if you've only got a 1 to 3 month timeline, beginning of your junior year, not going to be necessary. But once you've started on that study timeline, we want to be taking practice tests every 2 to 4 weeks. Again, because this is a learned skill and it's a skill that we need to develop, and because we can learn from those practice tests. We also want to avoid cramming. Now that can be last minute cramming before a test or practice test, but it can also be, I haven't studied all week, time to study all of Saturday. That's not going to be good study. After a couple of hours, typically we start making mistakes we shouldn't make, which is actively bad for our learning. So if you find yourself making mistakes, walk away and try later in the day or try another day. We want to keep our study high quality as well as consistent. All right. And then best practice number 2, regardless of year, is to learn from your mistakes. All right. So principle number one here is to aim to never make the same error twice. This is something that I've talked about in a bunch of different videos, a bunch of different webinars. It is my number one tip. I find that a lot of people end up drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling, especially if they start early and they do so many problems, but they make the same mistakes over and over again that they've built bad habits and then they have no material to fix them with. It's a bad situation. So what we want to do is we want to, rather than focusing on quantity, focus on quality, right? We want to go, okay, I have made this mistake. I'm going to focus on this mistake so that I never, ever make it again, so that I am not building bad habits and so that I'm using this material, of which there are limited quantities, in a wise way. All right. So we're not going to make bad connections in our brain. We're going to make good ones. All right. And then we are going to use our mistakes to target at least the last month of our study to our weaknesses. All right, so that's going to make sure that we have all of our most important strategies for us personally right at the forefront of our minds when we go into our test. And it's going to make sure that we are getting the most value out of our time. So if we are seniors, we are getting as much value out of our entire study timeline as possible. If we are juniors, maybe we start with something that provides us that foundation, but then we're really using that to hone in on our personal mistakes. And if we are sophomores, we can plan for that based on whatever our timeline ends up being. All right, so those are our two best practices, regardless of timeline. Keep it consistent and learn from our mistakes. So let's go ahead and talk through our final takeaways here. So takeaway number one, everyone here, remember, consistency is key with your study. Study regularly, take practice tests regularly, avoid cramming, and learn from your mistakes. Make sure that you are reviewing any errors. If you are just drilling, that is low quality study, and targeting at least the last chunk of your prep. Where'd my mouse go? If you are a senior, we are going to jump in with targeted prep. So we are going to right off the bat use a practice test to figure out where we need to focus our energies, and then do that, repeating that process with practice tests throughout. If you are a junior, we might consider starting with comprehensive prep, like a live class, like the ones Magoosh offers. And then we're going to aim to test before our senior year. But again, remembering if we start with comprehensive prep, that we want to target it toward the end. And then we're going to aim to test before our senior year with the goal of not having to do anything with testing in our senior year. But if we need to retake, we have the whole summer to prep before we take our final practice test. All right, if you are a sophomore, this is a great time to figure out your test and timeline by taking practice tests for each exam. And if you are a freshman, this is a great time to focus on other things. Take that verb that you have for testing and focus on other things that are going to help you be admitted to college. All right, so that is our webinar. We are going to go ahead and take a break for questions. And by take a break, I mean this is the end of our webinar. If you have no questions, feel free to head out. But if you do have questions, I'll be taking those in the chat and in the Q&A in Zoom, as well as in the chat in YouTube. And again, I want to plug that code Magoosh webinar 9/27/21. So that's today's date, for 20% off any ACT or SAT plan. So that's our online options, as well as our live classes for SAT or ACT, as well as our admissions programs. We've got those starting in the next week or two. So I really recommend checking out our plans page to see what's available. And I hope you can join us. All right, thanks so much for being here. See you later if you're headed out. I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the questions that have already come in. So the first question that I saw was from YouTube, from Prisha, and it says, hey, I am giving ACT in October, but I cannot study for it because of all my schoolwork. So what shall I do? Yeah, this is really, really common, that we just end up really kind of overwhelmed by all of the stuff that's going on, right? If you're a junior or a senior in particular, those are really busy years. I remember that I had a lot going on personally at that time in my life. And I also found it really difficult to find time to study. So couple of things that I would shout out here. So I would what I would return to is that idea of putting it on the calendar. Now, I don't want to come off like I'm saying you should spend every single moment of your day, every single moment of your week doing something productive. It is important to have downtime. But I find often that if I'm not really rigorous with scheduling my unscheduled time, I just take downtime. And I end up spending more time doing leisure activities than I really intended to do. So one thing that I would really just encourage you to do is to take kind of a critical eye to your unscheduled time and go, is there any of that unscheduled time I can go ahead and just commit to doing my study here? I also find, kind of related, that if I don't specifically schedule like time to do other things, that I can just let my homework take as long as I want it to, right? I can spend like 5 hours doing something that I could have gotten done in an hour and a half. So put it on the calendar. I find that time can expand to accommodate things if we plan for it. So that would be the first thing that I would recommend. The second thing that I would recommend is you don't need, again, 20 hours a week. I recommend at least 5. If you can get at least 5 hours in, you can have a really decent study schedule. You may not be able to achieve that recommended 10, but you might be able to do 5. If you are going for a lower number of hours, I'm going to really recommend that targeting mechanism, right? So really trying to go, how can I maximize those 5 hours? So that's going to be focusing on the things that are most important to you, but also what's going to be really, really useful there is making sure to dedicate like half of that time to reviewing your mistakes. So mistake reviewing is a really powerful tool. A lot of folks, I think, don't do that very often, especially if they have less time. Dedicate half of your time to that. So hopefully that helps. I know that test date is coming up quite soon, but target, and try to schedule your prep. Hopefully that helps. Okay, the next question that I saw came in the Q&A. And it says, roughly how many quality SAT practice tests are available so we can plan to use them well? Great question. There are, I believe at the moment, 10 official SAT practice tests that are available through the SAT website or through Khan Academy. So the College Board website is the SAT website, and you can access a bunch of practice tests there. You can access all of them on Khan Academy as well, and they may have 2 others that are not currently available on that website. There are also 2 practice tests that used to be on the College Board website that they took down for being not quite perfect, but they're still really good prep, and I still recommend them, even if they're not perfect matches for what's exactly on the test. So those are the ones that I would recommend. And again, there's like 10 of those, which if you're looking at a senior year timeline, plenty if you're taking them every 2 weeks. But if you're looking at a longer junior year timeline, all right, you may have enough to take one every month. So you may be looking at every 4 weeks. So hopefully that helps. There are other quality practice tests available that are not official. So you can get a free SAT practice test from Magoosh if you just search Magoosh SAT practice test or Magoosh SAT practice test PDF. You can find that. And then we have up to 4 more that are generated in our online program that you also get with live classes. If you want more practice tests there, and those are going to be high quality. They're going to be taken from problems that you haven't worked through yet within Magoosh until you run out. And that just provides some more. There are also practice tests available from other test prep companies, but I just recommend as you get away from official material to just really kind of do your research and make sure that the tests you're doing are accurate. I find that different test prep companies have tests that are either spot on or maybe a little harder or maybe a little easier. And you can end up with a test score that you think is going to be right, but isn't quite indicative. So just be careful as you get away from official material. Stick with official ones if you can. All right. one came in a while ago in the chat. Are there any updates on the individual section testing? Not that I have heard. I think that's one of those things that kind of got deprioritized as a lot of changes were being made with test optional, with having to do testing in pandemic settings, with cancellations, things having to open new test centers in order to maintain social distancing, things like that. My understanding, again, is that that is something that they hope to revisit in the future. But as far as I know, it is not something that has been rolled out for either exam, which is kind of unfortunate. If it has been rolled out, it's been in the last couple of weeks. One thing that you can do is just check out the blog for either College Board or ACT for continued updates. But we do really try to keep up on those things, and we'll share them as soon as we know, either on our blog or on our YouTube channel. So I recommend subscribing to our YouTube channel and checking back on our blog for any updates. But as far as I know, there is no immediate plan to make that happen, which is kind of a shame. So a takeaway there is that if you are retesting and you're like, wow, I really need to improve my math section, also spend some time on your other sections to make sure that they don't drop, because that, full disclosure, happened to me when I was in senior year. I still had a really good score. It was fine, but I ended up seeing the exact amount increase in one section, decrease in another section. Kind of a bummer. And it happens to a lot of students. So you cannot at the moment retake individual sections. So just make sure that you're prepared for all of them when you go in for a retake. Okay. Next question that came in, can I talk about testing accommodations for kids diagnosed with ADHD and other learning differences? Yes, I can. So basically, accommodations that you can get if you are diagnosed with ADHD or dyslexia or things like that are basically extra time. That's the primary thing that you can get. Time and a half is just a really common one, where basically instead of, if a section is 60 minutes, you can get 90 minutes for that section. So time and a half is a really great accommodation for a lot of students. I would recommend, if you know that you have that accommodation, to practice with that timing at home just to get used to it, because while it does provide more time for individual questions, and that's really helpful, it also just means that you have to have a crazy amount of endurance in order to get through that exam, because it is just longer, right? So that's something to really practice and make sure that you are comfortable with that endurance. So that's one thing that I'll share from students I've worked with who've had that accommodation. The other thing that typically comes with those accommodations is that you're typically going to be testing in a different classroom, either alone or with other students who have that accommodation as well. So typically that classroom is going to be less distracting because there just aren't as many students in there. So that's just another thing to consider with those accommodations. One thing that I will share with accommodations for any standardized test is that they are kind of a pain to get because you need to provide evidence that you need those accommodations. So often that's going to be like a doctor's note, and it typically takes like weeks to months to process, in my experience with other standardized tests as well. So if you are looking for those accommodations and you don't currently have them, I would look into it as soon as possible and start taking action on that as soon as possible, just to ensure that that actually does go through, because I've seen folks who wanted those accommodations who weren't able to make them happen on time. So moral of the story, practice with those timing accommodations to make sure that that actually is helpful, and then take action as soon as possible. Hopefully that helps. All right. The next question that came in was in the Q&A. I really struggle with reading faster. What do I do to read and understand the reading portion? I did a webinar, a live class on this topic. It's not specifically like to read faster, but it's how to approach the passage, and the result is getting through it faster. Basically, spoiler alert, you don't read it, you skim it. So that's something that I cover. It's I have one for the SAT and one for the ACT. It's like ACT live class or SAT live class, and it's specifically about, for ACT, the reading and science section, for SAT, just the reading section. And it's about attacking those passages. The first hour is like broad information on the test, so you may just want to skip over that if that's not helpful for you. The second hour is focused specifically on those passages and getting through them efficiently. So I really recommend checking that out, just because it does get into that in detail. But the kind of high level thing, if you're looking for like immediate recommendations, is that you're not going to read every word. Just read the important sentences. So that's things like first and last sentences, sentence with contrast or conclusion transition words, anything with powerful tone. That's about it. And that's going to give you as much information as you need to answer the general questions, and it's going to give you a good map of the passage. So when you get to a specific question, you can figure out where to look. So we're not going to read every word. There are going to be sentences that we skip completely. We're going to probably read like a third to half of the actual passage, and that's going to be enough. So kind of a wild strategy, but it's worked wonders for my students. So again, I really recommend checking that live class out. Hopefully that helps. It's posted on our YouTube channel. Okay, we got a question. Can we please post the YouTube link for this webinar? Thanks. It's going to be, yeah, actually, you know what? I can do that right now. I'm just going to send that to everybody in the Zoom. All right, so that is where that live stream is right now, and it'll also be where it is when we post the recording. So if you want to watch that recording, it is at that YouTube link. You can also just go to our YouTube channel and you should see it posted there, as well as recordings for all of those other webinars and live classes that I mentioned. I'm not seeing any other questions. If anyone does have any other questions, feel free to throw those either in the chat, in Zoom, the chat, and YouTube, or in the Q&A, and I'm still happy to answer those. But again, I want to remind everybody of that 20% off code, Magoosh webinar 92721. If you want to join us for our live classes, I wrote that curriculum. We have expert instructors who can help give you one-on-one support, as well as teach, again, 95% of what's going to be on the test, as well as our admissions classes, which I teach. They're starting in the next week or two, and then always available is our online program. So really recommend checking that out. All right, we have a request to go back to the junior page. I can absolutely do that. And there's 2 junior pages. So this is the second junior page. Quick synopsis, take the PSAT if you can, and consider starting with a comprehensive plan and then going to a more targeted plan. And then the previous slide for junior year was basically saying, ideally here we want to plan to test in our junior year, and we might be one and done. Great, we don't have to do it at all in our senior year, but if we want to retake, then we have the whole summer in order to prep to take it at the beginning of our senior year. So ideally we're taking 1 at the end of junior year, maybe 2, junior and senior. All right, and then again, a reminder, you can always check that out at that YouTube link, those recordings. All right, no problem. All right, it looks like we are good. If anyone ends up with any questions after the fact, you can always email us. Our contact information is on our website, or you can always add questions in the comments on our YouTube channel, and one of our experts will answer them for you. But again, thanks so much for attending today. Hopefully you found this information useful, and I hope that we see you in one of our live classes or admissions crash courses soon. See you later.